think this is where we are. Page 275, the top 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. And here's the quote. Why would the apostles lie? If they lied, what was their motive? What did they get out of it? What they got out of it was misunderstanding, rejection, persecution, torture, and martyrdom. Hardly a list of perks. We have seen very powerful evidence that the major New Testament documents were written by eyewitnesses and their contemporaries within 15 to 40 years of the death of Jesus. Add to that the confirmation from non-Christian sources and archaeology, and we know beyond a reasonable doubt that the New Testament is based on historical fact. But how do we know the authors did not exaggerate or embellish what they say they saw? There are at least 10 reasons we can be confident that the New Testament writers did not play fast and loose with the facts. First reason. The New Testament writers included embarrassing details about themselves. One of the ways historians can tell whether an author is telling the truth is to test what he says by the principle of embarrassment. This principle assumes that any details embarrassing to the author are probably true. Why? Because the tendency of most authors is to leave out anything that makes them look bad. I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to ask you if you believe my story is true. We were in church. I was actually in church alone. Jeff had a headache, and I don't know where the kids were. Maybe they were helping out in the nursery or something. I'm not sure, but I was in church alone. And we sit up close to the front. I was in about the third row on the, we don't actually have a center aisle. We have like aisles. Anyway, I was on an aisle up front. And we were worshiping, we were singing, and I was worshiping. And apparently I'm a little more active in worship than I realized I was, because when I went to sit down, I wasn't standing in the same place that I was when I stood up. And so I went to sit down, and about a half of my right butt cheek hit the chair, and I went down on the floor in the middle of the aisle. My first thought was, I really hope Josh isn't back there somewhere because he's taking pictures of me right now. My second thought was, there's no graceful way up from this. And the poor young couple behind me are like, are you okay? And I was fine. I was laughing. And of course, once I got to my seat, I leaned forward to tell my good friend Angie what I had just done because she didn't realize that she was in front of me. Do you think that's a true story? It absolutely is a true story. Why would I tell that story, right? It's embarrassing of me. If I was going to make up a story, I'd tell you something brilliant I did, right? Not something embarrassing. So how does the New Testament measure up to the principle of embarrassment? Let's put it this way. If you and your friends were concocting a story that you wanted to pass off as the truth, would you make yourselves look like dim-witted, uncaring, rebuked, doubting cowards? Of course not. But that's exactly what we find in the New Testament. The people who wrote down much of the New Testament are characters or friends of characters in the story, and often they depict themselves as complete morons. They are dim-witted numerous times. They fail to understand what Jesus is saying. They are uncaring. They fall asleep on Jesus twice when he asks them to pray. The New Testament writers later believe Jesus is the God-man, yet they admit they twice fell asleep on him in his hour of greatest need. Moreover, they make no effort to give their friend a proper burial, but record that Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin, the very court that sentenced Jesus to die. They are rebuked. Peter is called Satan by Jesus, and Paul rebukes Peter for being wrong about a theological issue. Paul writes, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he was clearly in the wrong, in Galatians 2. Now keep in mind that Peter is one of the pillars of the early church, and here's Paul including in Scripture that he was wrong. They are cowards. All the disciples but one hide when Jesus goes to the cross. Peter even denies him 3 times after explicitly promising, I will never disown you. Meanwhile, as the men are hiding for fear of the Jews, the brave women stand by Jesus and are the first to discover the empty tomb. They are doubters, despite being taught several times that Jesus would rise. They are doubters, despite being taught several times that Jesus would rise from the dead. The disciples are doubtful when they hear of the resurrection. Some are even doubtful after they see him. Now, think about this. If you were a New Testament writer, would you include these embarrassing details if you were making up a story? Would you write that one of your primary leaders was called Satan by Jesus, denied the Lord 3 times, hid during the crucifixion, and was later corrected on a theological issue? Would you depict yourselves as uncaring, bumbling cowards and the women whose testimony was not even admissible in court as the brave ones who stood by Jesus and later discovered the empty tomb? Would you admit that some of you, the 11 remaining disciples, doubted the very Son of God after he had proven himself risen to all of you? Of course not. What do you think the New Testament writers would have done if they were making up a story? You know perfectly well what they would have done, or perfectly well. They would have left out their ineptness, their cowardice, the rebuke, the 3 denials, and their theological problems, and depicted themselves as bold believers who stood by Christ through it all, and who confidently marched down to the tomb on Sunday morning, right through the elite Roman guards, to find the risen Jesus waiting to congratulate them on their great faith. The men who wrote it also would say that they declared the risen Jesus to the women, who were the ones hiding in fear of the Jews. And of course, if the story was a concoction, no disciple at any time would have been portrayed as doubting, especially after Jesus had risen. In short, we don't have enough faith to believe that the New Testament writers included all of those embarrassing details in a made-up story. The best explanation is that they were really telling the truth, warts and all. Number 2, the New Testament writers include embarrassing details and difficult sayings of Jesus. The New Testament writers are also honest about Jesus. Not only do they record self-incriminating details, things that make them look bad about themselves, they also record embarrassing details about their leader, Jesus, that seem to place him in a bad light. Jesus is considered out of his mind by his mother and brothers, his own family, who come to seize him in order to take him home. Jesus is not believed by his own brothers. Jesus is thought to be a deceiver. Jesus is deserted by many of his followers. Jesus turns off Jews who had believed in him to the point that they want to stone him. Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. He's called a madman. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, an event that had the potential to be perceived as a sexual advance, is crucified by the Jews and Romans, despite the fact that anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. This is certainly not a list of events and qualities the New Testament writers would choose if they were writing to depict Jesus as the perfect, sinless God-man. Nor are these qualities congruent with the Jewish expectation that Messiah would come to free them from political oppression. In fact, according to their own Bible at the time, the Old Testament, Jesus was cursed by God for being hanged on a tree. The best explanation for these embarrassing details is that they actually occurred, and the New Testament writers are telling the truth. In addition to embarrassing details, there are several difficult sayings attributed to Jesus that the New Testament writers would not have included if they were making up a story about Jesus being God. For example, according to the New Testament, Jesus declares, "The Father is greater than I," seems to predict incorrectly that he's coming back to earth within a generation. Then says about his second coming that no one knows the time, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son. Seems to deny his deity, but asking the rich young ruler, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone." Is seen cursing a fig tree for not having figs when it wasn't even the season for figs. seems unable to do miracles in his hometown except to heal a few sick people. If the New Testament writers wanted to prove to everyone that Jesus was God, then why did they leave in these difficult sayings that seem to argue against his deity? Moreover, Jesus makes what seems to be a completely morbid claim. I tell you the truth, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. After this hard saying, John says, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Since the New Testament writers certainly would not invent this strange saying in unfavorable reactions, it must be authentic. While there are reasonable explanations for these difficult sayings, it doesn't make sense that the New Testament writers would leave them in if they were trying to pass off a lie as the truth. In fact, it doesn't make sense that they would make up a character anything like Jesus. A weak and dying Messiah, a sacrificial lamb, is the very antithesis of a man-made hero. Again, the best explanation is that the New Testament writers were not playing fast and loose with the facts, but were extremely accurate in recording exactly what Jesus said and did. So if you would please open up your little atheist books. And we are on page 76. So you will list the 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth, but don't do that right now. We'll do that after we do the next two questions, and then you can go back and fill those in. Number 2, explain how including embarrassing details about themselves implies that what the writers wrote is probably true.
Somebody really like
Yeah, when you're inventing a story, you make yourself look better, right? Not worse. And especially in a story where we're trying to persuade someone of the truth, right? We would present the best version of ourselves, not the worst version of ourselves, if we're trying to persuade people. When Carl Jung, I think it was when he was a junior, he wrote his legacy story about a mission trip to Calvin Crest. And the story was about how he accidentally stepped on a board that had a nail in it, and it literally impaled his foot. And Cam McWilliams and Sam Bergerson had to carry him back to the bunkhouse or whatever, and they had to get him some medical treatment. And it was a hilarious story. I mean, he made it hilarious. I mean, I'm reading this going, how can you laugh about this? This is awful, right? But obviously that's a true story because he wouldn't tell them himself. I mean, he'd make himself one of the heroes of the story, not the idiot that stepped on a nail and impaled his own foot. So that's a mark of a true story. We tend to want to make ourselves look good, not bad. Number 3, explain how including difficult sayings of Jesus imply that what the writers wrote is probable. Okay, that's true, but how is that? I mean, they're trying to convince people that Jesus is the Messiah. Yeah.
they're not hiding anything.
Yeah. Those things, so the embarrassing details and the hard sayings, go against their stated goal of wanting people to believe in Jesus. So the only explanation there can be is that Jesus actually said those things and those embarrassing things actually happened. If their goal is to get people to believe in Jesus and he says you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, it's not going to be real helpful, is it? So it means that it's probably true. If those sayings or those stories are less likely to make people believe in Jesus, it affirms the truthfulness of what they're saying. Okay, here's where we're headed for the rest of the period. You're going to write down those 10 things for chapter 1, the 10 top 10 reasons that we know that the New Testament writers told the truth. Once you've done that, you're working on your verse mapping. Okay?